to your student dashboard. Hopefully everyone's done this at this point. If not, no problem. You can go ahead and do that after the webinar. But one of the first things we want to bring to your attention is your address. Okay, this is where we're going to be sending that EPA hard copy card. So please make sure your address is correct inside your student portal. If it's not, shoot us a message. Put it right in the chat of your EPA proctored exam. You can throw it right in the chat there, but make sure we got the right address. So next thing we want to do is launch the course. All your courses will come lined up like this. This, of course, is the EPA 608 Universal. You're going to click that. It's going to open you up to your student portal. All right, a lot of information in the student portal. The webinar that we're going through today is designed to deliver the curriculum for the EPA exam. Okay, so we're going to point out what's important. So as we go through it, I'm going to say, hey guys, this is on the test. You may even see some of the same questions from the test during practice, which is fine, but there's also a bevy of information inside your student portal. There's bonus content, some good practice situations to take away into your day-to-day. Also inside the student portal, towards the bottom are your practice exams. These guys are really important. It's a rotating question bank. It breaks it into the 4 categories, which is core, type 1, type 2, type 3, which we're going to go over in a minute. But utilize the practice exams. Once you start scoring proficient in the 80s on all the sections, now you're ready to go ahead and take that proctored exam. All right. Note towards the bottom, final exam only open with a proctor. This guy right here, you only open that in a proctored setting. And how do you know you're in a proctored setting? You're going to have an instructor just like me giving you guys instructions before you go ahead and open that final exam. All right. If you open it and you take the test and you complete it, even if you pass, but you weren't in a proctoring session, it is not going to count. Okay. More on this towards the end. We're going to explain the proctoring schedule, such as this. We have 4 or 5 proctoring sessions per week. We even offer them some Sundays for your convenience. Brando, the other instructor, he's going to grab some links. He's going to throw it in the chat for you guys. All right. That way you'll have those links when you're ready to test. We have one today at 2 o'clock. So the webinar should end right around 1. There's a proctoring at 2. So if you guys feel like you're ready, there's your link. You jump right into that proctoring session at 2 p.m. And I'm going to throw times out at you guys. Keep a note, we're East Coast time, okay? We're Standard Eastern time. So if you live in California, obviously you guys are going to be on a different schedule. So please make sure you're using Eastern time zone. Okay? A little bit about us. We're a small family school. All right. We've been around since 1982. We started in the boiler plant business plant operation. Last couple of years, we shifted to teaching the trades, electrical, HVAC, plumbing, all that stuff. We are stationed here in Wrightstown, New Jersey. I saw we had a student from Trenton. So Jimmy, we're right around the corner from you, man. So check out our website. We got a lot of cool courses.
Recording in progress.
This is also recorded. Okay. Once this ends in about 40 minutes, the copy of this recording is going to go to your student portal. So we always ask you guys, you don't have to go crazy taking notes here. Okay. We kind of want your attention. And then if you want to go back later, re-listen to the webinar and take your notes, you can take your time with it. You can rewind, you can go back. All right. So another cool feature is that you're going to get a recording of this exact webinar. A little bit about myself. My name is Rob Roy. I'm the HVAC program director here at the training center. I'm a state of New Jersey HVACR contractor as well as contractor sponsor. And what does that mean? That means I can sponsor people through their apprenticeship as well as I teach other contractors their continuing education for the industry. We also have Brando Badia on. He's going to walk you guys through some cool stuff like heat theory, basics of refrigeration. All right. So Brando is actually a graduate of the training center here, one of our career programs. Okay. My information, rob@thetrainingcenter.com. Pretty simple. All right. You guys got a question? Even if it's technically out on a job site, you got questions on something, shoot me an email. Okay. We're never opposed to doing that. There's a strong admin staff that run behind the scenes. Bianca, Abby, Nicole, they'll all be part of um, the administrative end of your loans. Okay. So let's say you take your proctor test today, you pass the test later today, they're going to process that. That means you're going to have a passing letter in your email later today that will alert you, hey, your documents are ready inside your student portal. That will just state your score that you get. It'll state your license number through the EPA. Okay. We mail the hard copy cards, but we do everything same day. We do that quick turnaround for you guys. All right. So, again, very important people. If you need us for anything, EPA at thetrainingcenter.com. Also, if you want to go on the website, thetrainingcenter.com, we have a virtual chat. Now, this virtual chat, it's always a live person. It's never a bot. If you leave a message after hours, that's the first thing we do in the morning. Okay. Carmen comes in, Diane comes in, and they address those chats right away and they sort them to the appropriate person. So, good way to talk to us. We have been approved as a certifying organization from the EPA Stratospheric Protection Division since 2011. What does that mean? That means we sent our curriculum in. The EPA said, hey, great job, guys. Yep, you can teach the EPA course. You guys are allowed to test and proctor. We also hold on to those records. So when you lose your card, you come to us. All right. The EPA doesn't have a large filing system where they have all these card holders. You always go back to your certifying organization. So we don't charge for replacement cards. After this, 5 years down the road, you lose your card, shoot us an email. And guess what? We run you off another card and put it in the mail free of charge. Okay. So basically, we got your back. We babysit the history of your EPA certification. We also are certified for the 609. Okay. So the difference, 608 is for stationary equipment. Okay. Stationary equipment, 609, automotive, non-stationary equipment, anything that moves. All right. So a little bit of difference in the 608, 609. Auto mechanics, they're looking for the 609. People involved with refrigerated food trucks need both, because the box on the back is considered stationary. However, the refrigerant for the cab is considered automotive. So it gets a little tricky. However, you guys are here for the 608. And the goal of the program is to provide you guys, the technicians, about safely handling refrigerants. And we got to control the emissions during service. Why? Because it's dangerous to the environment. All right. And we're going to go through all that. That's part of the core section. All right. This license is national. It transfers state to state. Okay. Once you get your card, you never have to renew that card. All right. So those are important things. If you're in New Jersey now and you move to Florida, that license goes with you. Okay. So it also, whether you're here because your company paid for it and they need you to have your license, it's still your license. You leave that company 5 years from now, there's no ties to that other company. All right. So that's the importance of the 608. Now, within our industry, there's differences. Okay. Residential, commercial, industrial. There's many different ways you can go in this industry. And whereas a lot of them want you to have the EPA card, that alone does not qualify, does not make you an HVAC technician. All right. A lot goes into this stuff. The only thing it does is it makes you legal for purchasing refrigerants and working on systems that contain refrigerants. So this entire webinar is really focused on delivering those objectives of why you need it when it comes into play. So the actual exam, there's 4 parts to it. There's the core. The core section is about why we're here, history of refrigerants, why they're important, what happened up there in the stratosphere to the ozone layer. So that's your core section. Type 1 is for small appliances. That is defined as an appliance sealed with 5 pounds of refrigerant or less. Okay. That's how they define type 1 small appliance. Comes pre-sealed with 5 pounds of refrigerant or less. For type 1 stuff, there's no leak requirements. All right. There's no leak inspection requirements. They're just considered small appliances. Okay. Type 2, here's where it gets tricky. High pressure appliances. All right. This is your residential systems, your rooftop systems. Type 3 is low pressure. Now, here's the difference. Okay. It's all relative to atmospheric pressure. Here in New Jersey, 14.7. All right. That's the pressure as on me as I sit here in my office. So any system that operates above 14.7 is high pressure. Anything that operates below 14.7 is low pressure. That's more industrial, centrifugal chillers, things of that nature. All right. But they split it up because of how these systems respond differently. If I get a leak in a high pressure appliance, I'm going to lose refrigerant. If I get a leak in a low pressure appliance, I'm not going to lose refrigerant. I'm going to pull in impurities, all right, and moisture, which we don't want to do. And that's the different classes of the refrigerant license. So something as simple as this, scrapping a refrigerator. Yeah, you need to have a type 1 license or a universal. All right. Universal is a blanket. It covers all the different types. But, you see guys running equipment to a scrapyard, that refrigerant's got to be recovered and they would need a license to do that. Now, the way we hook it up, we do 100-question multiple choice test. We don't break it into sections. All right. Your practice tests are. So if you struggle with type 3, you can focus on type 3. We do it 100 questions, multiple choice answers. Okay. You're going to see questions like this. Here's where we activate the chat. And I'm going to tell you guys, especially on this exam, take the time and read all the answers. The EPA is looking for the best answer. All right. So let's try one. Persons recovering refrigerant from a small appliance must be certified as what? Just give me the letter. There you go. All right. We're getting a mixed bag here, which is fine. That's what this webinar is for. That's usually what we see. All right. Everyone who said C is correct. Let's dissect it, right? Persons recovering refrigerant from a small appliance must be certified as A is type 1 technician. It's correct. C is type 1 or universal. It's a more complete answer, okay? So you test takers out there that are like me, I know the information. I read the question, boom. First answer, type 1 tech. Yep, that's it. This is where I'm saying, slow down. You have 2 hours to take this exam. Read all the answers, process of elimination, okay? So as you go through this, type 1, okay, that's possible. Type 2, well, I know it's not that. That's dealing with high pressure appliances. Type 1 or universal, yeah, truth statement right there. All of the above. Well, we know it's not all of the above. We already got rid of type 2. So I will also tell you this. When taking the EPA exam, the answer is never all of the above or none of the above. Okay. So right there, if you get that answer in one of your multiple choice questions, get rid of it. It's never all of the above. Okay. So that's kind of what it is. And they want to make sure that you just paid attention. Okay. Universal is the umbrella, covers all of them. So look for the best possible answer. You must get at least a 72 to pass the exam and get your EPA license. Now, you take it once, you get a 64, no big deal. Just take it again. Okay. Get back in the portal, do some studying. We don't charge for retest. You can take this test as many times as you need. But if you go through the process and you use the portal the right way, most guys have no problem. If you've been in the industry for a while, in another, faction of it, not dealing with refrigerants, and now you have to have this card, no big deal. You'll probably do okay on the test. All right. So when you're in a proctoring session, you take your test, boom, your results are instant. Okay. What you'll do, you'll get your score. You can see what you got wrong, what you got right, but you're not going to exit out of that Zoom meeting until the instructor confirms that with you. So you'll say something to the effect of, hey, Brando, I'm done. And he'll say, yep, we got your email or we got the email from the EPA. Good job, blah, blah, blah. Confirm your score. Okay, you're free to go. Now, if you don't pass the exam, we don't get an email. So at that point, you know you didn't do well. If you got less than a 72, you're going to have to take it again. So at that point, you can just exit and sign up for another proctoring session. And at the end of this webinar, Brando's going to take you through your portal as well as how we get on a proctoring session. So this right here is where you're going to see your passing letter. All right, inside your dashboard, the email you get after you pass the test will walk you through how to do that. Okay, so here's our journey. We're here. It's the webinar. Do a little bit of studying and boom, we all get that universal certification. Okay, we're going to get into the curriculum now. This is about the core section. Okay, the core is the history of why these regulations exist. Okay, so if we think about it, 8 billion people share this earth as of this year. So the need for environmentally friendly or comfort products is always increasing. So when we think about how we got here, there's a couple different measurements throughout history that we're concerned with. Okay, we got ODP and GWP. Now, these are our measurements. Every refrigerant has an ODP rating and a GWP rating. So we're going to take it slow and we're going to go one by one. ODP was first. Okay. ODP is the potential for a single molecule of refrigerant to destroy the ozone layer. All right. That's ODP, ozone depleting potential. So when a chlorine-based refrigerant was released, now these are old school refrigerants, CFCs, HCFCs, okay, halons in a lot of aerosols and fire extinguishers back in the day. All right, they contain bleach. Bleach is the chemical most responsible for the damage to the ozone layer. So if we look at our atmospheric regions, we have our stratosphere, which is 7 to 30 miles above, and our troposphere, which is the ground to 7 miles up. ODP happens here in the stratosphere. They're not going to ask you how far away is the stratosphere from the Earth. What they're going to ask you is what atmospheric region did ODP affect? Stratosphere. Okay, it was up in the stratosphere. So if we look at this slide here, the ozone layer is made up of ozone molecules and it lives up in the stratosphere. This invisible layer lets visible light through, but it protects us from dangerous UV rays. We're talking about skin cancer, glaucoma, things of that nature. Each ozone molecule, so when we mention a molecule, we're talking about this guy right here. That is an ozone molecule. Each ozone molecule is made up of 3 oxygen atoms that are bonded together. Okay, that's an ozone molecule, and they line up just like this. All right, so 3 oxygen atoms bonded together. So what happened was once an ozone molecule was released to the atmosphere, the UV rays would break up the molecule. This single chlorine atom would seek out an ozone molecule to steal one of its oxygen atoms. This creates chlorine monoxide and leaves diatomic oxygen. Now, diatomic oxygen, we need it. We need oxygen to survive, but it doesn't protect us from dangerous UV rays. Once chlorine monoxide grabs a second oxygen atom, it releases the diatomic. It's free to destroy ozone molecules over and over and over again. Okay, here's your test question from that. A single chlorine atom can destroy 100,000 ozone molecules. It can be up in the atmosphere for 100 years, but a single chlorine atom can destroy 100,000 ozone molecules. So if we go back to this guy here and we look at our ozone layer, let's say we get rid of this atom here and this atom here, these guys are going to float away as diatomic oxygen, you can see the holes that are built, right? This is all about skin cancer, glaucoma, dangerous UV rays. That's what's going on up there. Okay, so that is chlorine based, all right? And a single chlorine atom can destroy 100,000 ozone molecules. Now, the good news is that ozone is always forming up there in the stratosphere. Okay. So in 1971, they noted the thinning of the ozone layer. This is when it started to be a problem. As of 2017, it was a hole over Antarctica. But by following the regulations and doing things the right way, by the year 2041, we're back to a thinning layer. And by 2065, we're all but repaired. So this is why it's important, whether you're a science guy, whether you're not a science guy, man, wouldn't you just, by following regulations and just making the world a better place for our future generations, that alone is worth it. Okay. So ODP happens in the stratosphere and it affects the ozone layer. Those are the takeaways. Now, GWP came along a little bit later. All right. GWP is global warming potential. Now, GWP is the measurement of how much an effect a single molecule of refrigerant will have on global warming. They use carbon dioxide as a baseline measurement for that. Okay. So carbon dioxide would have a single molecule of carbon dioxide would be a measurement of 1. Okay. What this looks like is this. When a refrigerant molecule is released, okay, it happens in the troposphere. So GWP is in the troposphere. When you release a high GWP refrigerant, it turns into like smog, okay? It's a pollutant, okay? So when we think about the sun radiates heat into the earth. It's supposed to bounce back out to a certain level. What's happening now is the sun's radiating heat in, and because of all the pollutants and smog, it's bouncing around. So we're retaining heat inside the troposphere. Science explains this is why we're seeing higher temperatures. This is why ocean temperatures, tropical waters, it used to be 72 to 84 degrees. Now they're tickling 90. So whether you believe in the science or not, the measurements don't lie. So this is what's happening with GWP. GWP happens in the troposphere. It has everything to do with global warming and greenhouse gases. So some of our refrigerants that are popular, R410A is in pretty much every residential system right now, has a GWP of 2088. R32 is 705. R454B, if you guys are in the industry, these are the new guys. All right, these are the new A2L refrigerants. But look at 410A. It's everywhere in our residential systems. It has a GWP of 2088. So a single molecule of 410A and a single molecule of carbon dioxide, that molecule of 410A does 2,088 times more damage than a single molecule of carbon dioxide. And you hear people talk about the carbon footprint, how bad carbon dioxide is. This is 2,088 times more damaging than carbon dioxide. So that's why we're seeing this shift into more natural type refrigerants. It's because of global warming. Okay. So moving forward, each refrigerant will have a measured ODP, ozone depleting potentials. Remember our takeaways from that. It's in the stratosphere, has everything to do with the ozone layer. GWP, global warming potential, in the troposphere, everything to do with greenhouse gases and global warming. Okay. Basically, what it comes down to is a high GWP refrigerant, or I should say a chlorine-free refrigerant. They're not as efficient in the systems that we operate. So we need more energy to power our refrigeration systems with these types of refrigerants, and that's where the greenhouse gases come from. energy waste. All right. So the new refrigerants, and we'll go over each classification of refrigerant in just a little bit, but the new refrigerants, they're more efficient in our systems, which cuts back on the power needed to power our system. So a timeline of how this all went down. The 30s and 50s was the birth of CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. All right, this is R11, R12. All right, super efficient refrigerants. They worked really well. They were non-toxic, non-flammable, but science noted in the 70s, they were destroying the ozone layer. So we needed a shift. So engineers and science got together and they said, hey, let's do this. Let's take their chemical structure, their molecular structure, and add hydrogen to it, right? So now we took a CFC, chlorofluorocarbon, added hydrogen to it. That made a hydrochlorofluorocarbon. Still did damage though. The hydrogen was meant to break up the molecule even further, which it did, but it still did damage. So if a CFC had an ODP rating of 1, an HCFC had an ODP rating of 0.5. This is like R22, R123. All right. Then we needed something to be chlorine free. That's your HFC. Okay. Hydrofluorocarbon. All right. These didn't have any chlorine. Now we started getting not efficient within our systems. This is R410A, R134A. It was in all our automobiles. R32 is another big HFC. All right. These guys, 0 ODP, but a very high GWP. And now, we're starting to see this phase into these newer refrigerants. And again, we'll go over the classifications a little bit later in the webinar. But if you're part of this refrigeration industry, man, we're adapting and changing on the fly because refrigerants are ever changing. Okay. So our takeaways: ODP, CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, high ODP, high GWP; HCFCs, hydrochlorofluorocarbons, low ODP, high GWP; hydrofluorocarbons, 0 ODP, high GWP; and your new guys, your hydrofluoroolefins, 0 ODP, very low GWP. On average, HFO refrigerants are 600 or better. All right. There's new regulations set forth by the EPA that as of this year in January, all manufacturers of residential heat pumps and air conditioning systems had to ship the system with a refrigerant that has a GWP of 700 or less. So 410A is out, right? Now you're going to start seeing some HFOs, your R454B. We're going to start seeing that shift very, very soon. Okay. So as part of the EPA 608 exam, they're going to ask you what state the refrigerant is in before or after a process of the refrigeration cycle. So to better understand what's going on inside our systems, we got to understand heat theory. Okay. So Brando is going to walk you guys through some important heat theory, and then I'll be back with the refrigerant cycle. You good, B?
Yeah, yep, I'm ready. All right, guys. Well, like Rob said, before we get into the refrigeration cycle, we first need to understand the basics of heat theory. So, what is heat theory? Heat theory is the foundation for how HVAC systems operate efficiently. Without that, we won't be able to move heat properly. So when we often think about heat, we often think about something getting warmer or a change in temperature, which is not wrong, but it doesn't explain why it happens. So let's take a closer look of what heat actually is. Heat is the transfer of kinetic energy from one matter to another or from an energy source to a medium or object. So just keep in mind, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only altered in form. So when you guys are rubbing your hands together, you're not creating heat, you're generating heat. You're converting kinetic energy into thermal energy. So let's break it down to a molecular level. All matter is made up of atoms and subatomic particles. The faster we get these particles vibrating, the more heat energy we have. So what about cold? So cold is best described as the lack of heat. With less heat, the particles have lower kinetic energy and therefore less thermal energy. So in sub-zero temperature, there's still heat energy present. That's why we use cold climate heat pumps with inverter technology to capture that heat energy and bring it into a conditioned space. So naturally, higher energy flows to lower energy, and that's where thermal becomes more important when we're talking about HVAC systems because that's how they function and how they be more efficient. So, for example, for us to capture heat energy in cold climates, we need to be at a colder temperature for us to be able to capture that heat energy and bring it in. So, as you can see in the picture, as the coils go out, it drops in temperature. So you're able to capture that heat energy from the outside and bring it into a conditioned space. And then once you bring it in, it goes to a compressor and picks it up. And now you're gonna be at a higher temperature and you're gonna be able to let it out through the indoor space. And we're gonna cover it more in detail when we get into the refrigeration cycle. But that's just a basic understanding of how heat energy works and how HVAC and heat energy go coexist. They're coexisting with each other. So there's gonna be a test question similar like this one. So which statement best describes the natural direction of heat flow? As I said earlier, hot flows to energy. Heat energy flows from hot to cold, or a better word, or better way or the way they phrased it is higher energy flows to lower energy. So for this specific one, the answer would be B. So this is just keep in mind they're always gonna be looking for the best answer, and I always want you guys to try to do the eliminate the process of elimination. So any answer that doesn't make sense, you always want to try to get rid of that. But yeah, and how do we measure this transfer? Well, we measure it with temperature. Temperature is the measure of how fast on average the particles are in an object, the particles in an object are moving. So let's take an oven, for example. If we were to set the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit and we throw a turkey in there, that heat from the oven is going to want to make that turkey 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So when two objects at different temperature are in contact, they exchange heat energy until they reach thermal equilibrium, meaning that they have the same temperature. This is also part of the Serov law of thermodynamics. Besides temperature, he can also make particles. Besides making particles move faster, he can also make particles move farther apart, which increases potential energy. Potential energy is stored energy that can be released and used to do work. So, for example, if I have a tub of warm water and we were to take the temperature of that tub, and then we were to scoop a cup of that same water and we were to check the temperature, they're going to be the same temperature. This is because on average, the molecules in the cup are moving at the same rate as those in the larger cup. However, the tub is going to have way more thermal energy since it has more term potential energy to do work. The tub it takes much longer for it to cool down. So we can also see this between the lighter and the radiator. So let's see it in the chat. Which one you guys think is gonna have the higher temperature? Is it gonna be the lighter or the radiator? There you go, Jamie with a lighter, Ryan lighter, Charles lighter. Oh, we got some Sean said radiator. So yeah, so the on average, the particles in the lighter are gonna be moving at a faster rate. That's making the lighter being having the higher temperature. However, the radiator has more mass and more heat, so it has way more thermal energy. And since it has way more thermal energy, it's able to have more potential energy. So it's able to give off more heat energy for longer. That's why you can warm up this room with a radiator and not with a lighter. So best way to remember the definitions for temperature and heat is temperature being the average energy of individual particles in motion, while heat is the total energy of individual particles in motion. So there's three ways we can move this heat. First one will be conduction. So that's molecule to molecule. So a cast iron pan on an open flame is a perfect example. Even when you put your hand on it, that's another example of conduction because that's molecule to molecule. Then you have convection. Convection is using mediums to transfer heat. So in this case, air. So if the furnace, a gas furnace is using room temperature air to warm up the house. And last but not least, you have radiation. So when electromagnetic waves traveling through space, so for example, if sun shining on your skin is a perfect example. So best way, because sometimes at least I get confused between convection and radiation. Best example is radiation don't use air to move transfer that heat, where convection relies on air movement to be able to, or fluids to be able to move that heat. So those are the two key differences between convection and radiation. So I'm gonna paint you a picture, guys. So picture this: it's a cold winter day. You're out for a walk, walking your dog in the park. After a while of walking, you decide to take a rest. You see two benches ahead of you. One is made up out of metal, and the other one is made out of wood. Which one do you guys think is gonna be the colder bench? Let's see it in the chat. Is it gonna be the wooden bench or the metal bench? We got wood, metal. So yeah, we got a little bit mixed in between. There you go. Juan got it. So this was actually a trick questions. So they're both actually going to be the same temperature. This is because of thermal equilibrium. However, when you put your hand on the metal band, it's going to feel much colder because metal is a conductor, so it's able to transfer heat energy at a faster rate. So when you put your hand on the metal bench, the heat from your body leaves at a faster rate, thus feeling much colder. And the wooden bench, since it's an insulator, it slows down the process of heat transfer, thus feeling warmer. So key thing to remember here is any material with high number of free electrons are better conductors because they're allowed energy to pass through them more efficiently. So here's a couple of lists of your good conductors and good insulators. So your good conductors will be your alloys. So this is your copper, silver, iron, steel. And this will be your bad conductors, which is wood, styrofoam, paper, or air. They're bad conductors, but they're good insulators. That's why we use wooden spoons when we cook because the heat from the wooden spoon doesn't travel as fast to your hand while you're stirring hot food, so you don't burn your hand as fast. This is also why we use fiberglass to insulate your house. Fiberglass is a good insulator, so it slows down the heat transfer between the structure and the outside, keeping heat from leaving the walls through the wintertime and then keeping heat from coming in during the summertime. So there's two types of heat when we're dealing with HVAC systems. The first one is sensible heat. Sensible heat is heat that we can feel or measure it. It's pretty much in its name, self-explanatory. So anytime you change the temperature on a thermostat, it is considered sensible heat because we're able to measure it or feel the difference. And the other type of heat would be latent heat. So latent heat doesn't have a change in temperature, it has a change in state. So anytime you go from a solid to a liquid or to a gas, those are considered latent heats because it's not a change in temperature, it's a change in state. So here's a graph to have a better understanding of it. So as you can see, you have your solid, you have your liquids, and then you have your steam. We already know water freezes at 32 degrees. So right here from 0 to 32 it is considered sensible heat because there's still a change in temperature. However, when you change from a solid to a liquid, it is considered the latent heat of fusion. And as you can see, you have to add 144 BTUs, but we'll talk about BTUs in the later slide. But right now we're focused on latent heat and sensible heat. So as you can see from 32, now to be able to pick up from 30 up to 212, it is considered sensible heat because there's a change in temperature. And then again, when you go from a liquid to a steam, it is considered the latent heat of vaporization because you're not having a change in temperature, but you're having a change in state. So those are just two key things you guys want to remember is anytime we're talking about latent heat, it's not a change in temperature, it's a change in state. And of course, if we're talking about sensible heat, we're talking about the change in temperature. And this is going to be very important when we're talking about the refrigeration cycle, because you're going to see how through the evaporator and through the condenser, you're not having a change in temperature, you're having a change in state. And when you go through the compressor and expansion valve, we're talking about change in temperature. But we're going to talk more in detail when we get to the refrigeration cycle. So we already know water at 32 degrees, it freezes. Water at 212, it boils. So what it has to do? It all has to do with BTUs. So BTU is the amount of energy it takes to heat 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. So what about milk or ice? Well, to be able to determine that, we first need to know the specific heat of those substances. So what is specific heat? Well, all substances heat and cool at different temperatures. That's why it's important to have this basic understanding of specific heat. So specific heat is the amount is the heat is oh sorry, the specific heat of any substance is the amount of heat required to raise 1 pound of that substance 1 degree Fahrenheit. So what about eggs or ice cream or beef? Well, they all have different measures of specific heat. Knowing the specific heat of a substance allows you to calculate how much energy is needed to heat or cool it. Well, lucky for us, scientists have already figured that specific heat for a bunch of materials. So as you can see, water is 1, specific heat is 1. We already know that. And then ice 0.5, steam 0.5, and so on and so on. And as you can see beef, steak is 0.735. So you need to know the material specific heat to know your tonnage to refrigerate it properly. So that's why HVAC units are sized by BTUs. So for example, if I need to buy refrigeration equipment capable of cooling 5,000 pounds of beef from 55 degrees to negative 20 degrees, I will need to know how much heat I'm removing to size my equipment. So I will need to know the specific heat of beef. I will need to know the mass of beef, the temperature difference. So these are all key factors that you guys want to keep in mind when you're sizing your equipment. So yes, and as well as you also need to know the BTUs of beef when you're having a change in the lane heat change of fusion. So those are just key differences you have to remember when you're sizing your equipment. So BTUs also can be used to calculate how much space it can effectively cool. So an AC generally needs around 20 BTUs per square feet. But you also have to keep in mind like other factors like the number of people in the room, the amount of sunlight the room gets, and how well the room is insulated. Because all this can affect the actual BTU requirement. So you might have to size up the equipment to be able to neutralize the heat content. So when AC units talk about BTUs, they are also measuring how much heat it can absorb from the area. When furnaces talk about BTU, it's talking about how much heat it can deliver. So just two difference when we're talking about AC and furnaces, but same thing. You're moving heat at all, on both ends. All right, so here's a better graph so I could show you guys the how BTUs affect the lane heat and the temperature of water. So as you can see, we already know the specific heat of ice is 0.5. So to bring it from 0 degrees to 32, we have to multiply 0.5 times 32, and that's where you get your 16 BTUs. So we're now at 32 degrees as a solid ice. Now to be able to convert from 32 to 32 in liquid form, we have to add 144 BTUs, and this is known as the lane heat of fusion. So now we're at 32 degrees as a liquid. Now to be able to pick up from 32 to 212, that's where you get the 180. And this is considered a sensible heat because you're able to see the temperature change. So now we're at we're at 212 as a liquid. Now to be able to switch from a liquid to steam, we have to add 970 BTUs, and this is known as the lane heat of vaporization. So now we're as a vapor at 212, and we already know that steam is 0.5. So depending on how high you want to go in temperature, we will multiply that by 0.5, and we will get, in this case, we'll get up to 300 or plus. So hopefully this was a better help you guys understand how BTUs can affect the temperature and the lane heat of fusion. So anytime you're having a lane heat change, you also got to think about entropy. So anytime you're increasing the disorder or randomness in the system, you're increasing entropy. So entropy is the measure of disorder or randomness in a system. So as you can see in the diagram, when you have low entropy, the particles are in motion. They're all still at standstill. They're in sequence. This is considered low entropy. Anytime you have high entropy, the particles are more scattered. They're unpredictable, and this is also part of the second law of thermodynamics. So another thing we got to think about when we're dealing with refrigerants is their boiling points. So we already know water at 212, it boils. R134A, it boils at negative 14.9. Ammonia, negative 28. And R410A, which is on most systems now, is negative 55. So why do we use these type of refrigerants? Well, under pressure, they actually pick up in temperature, which makes it more comfort cooling. So, for example, R410A under 200 psi, it will boil at 65 degrees Fahrenheit, which is good temperature for your homes. So anytime you're increasing pressure of a closed system, you're also increasing the temperature and vice versa. And we're gonna get more in detail why this is important when we're dealing with our refrigeration cycle, because it's all about pressure, and that's where your compressor comes involved and your expansion valve. It has to do with all pressure, and Rob will explain it more in detail. So here's a better understanding. When we're dealing with HVAC systems, we're gonna be up here for the majority of the time. We're gonna be in the latent heat of vaporization and the latent heat of condensation. So we're just gonna be swapping between the two. And like I said, Rob will explain it better when we get to the refrigeration cycle. All right, so now let's talk about the basics of the refrigeration. So what is refrigeration? So if I majority of the people or even I before I knew what it is now, I thought it was creating code, but it's not. So instead it's removing heat. It removes heat from the space and moves it to another space, another area. That's pretty much what refrigeration is. So for example, when you're at a convenience store or you're at a Walmart or ShopRite, when you see these type of refrigeration banks of refrigeration, when they're installed, the guys who are installing it, they need to know the specific heat of these items. So for this example, they will need to know the specific heat of alcohol. They need to see how much alcohol they're trying to remove the heat from. You also got to think about like for example, if you were to add ice cream here, it won't be efficient because ice cream has a lower specific heat. So you need to have colder, remove more heat to be able to keep it at a comfort temperature. So now that we learned the science behind HVAC systems, let's learn a little bit about the history. So back then, you didn't have the luxury to just open the fridge for a cold drink. People would use ice boxes to store food, and these ice boxes needed large blocks of ice to keep things cold or from spoiling. So picture this. Every 2, 3 days, a truck would drop off a block of ice at your house and store. The Iceman would grab it with a huge metal tongs and then carry it right into your kitchen. So imagine having a stranger walk through your house every week just to deliver 50 pounds of ice. I don't even feel comfortable opening the house to the PSNEG. So imagine having that every 2, 3 days. And they probably won't. They don't even knock on the door. Sometimes they would just walk through. So yeah, it was different back in the day. So let's just have a better understanding of how ice boxes work. So the way ice boxes would work, the heat energy from the food, the heat energy from the food would travel to the ice because naturally heat flows from hot to cold, and the heat from the food will cause the ice to melt, and this would be considered the latent heat of vaporization, and then the melted ice will travel to the drain line and out through the back. So this is usually you either have a drain pan or you will have it sticking straight out the house. All right, so yes, when an HVAC systems is sized by tons, it's simply using that old measure of how much cooling capacity is needed. So a ton of ice was defined as the amount of ice needed to melt over 24 hours and absorb enough heat to cool 1 ton. So in HVAC worlds, a 1 ton unit has the ability to remove 12,000 BTUs of heat from the air each hour. How we get that number? Well, 140, we already know that a 1 pound of ice requires 144 BTUs to melt. So a ton equals to 2,000 pounds. So 2,000 pounds times the 144, that's where we get 288,000 BTUs. We divide that over the 24 hours, and that's how we get the 12,000 BTUs per hour. And this is how the tons, when you're on the as a technician, when you're out on the field, this is how you're gonna be able to size your equipment. So if you have a 2 ton unit, you know that you're dealing with a 24,000 BTU unit. And like I said, once you get on the field, it gets easier and easier to identify it. So when you see refrigerant capacity, is referring to the amount of refrigerant a cooling system can hold and operate with. So there's two types of cooling also when you were dealing with HVAC systems, specifically evaporators. So you have direct cooling and then you have indirect cooling. So direct cooling is any time the evaporator is in the conditioned space, while indirect cooling is any time the evaporator is outside of the conditioned space. So for example, your walk-in freezers, these are considered direct cooling because the evaporator is right in the conditioned space. While centrifugal chillers, these are considered your indirect coolings because they're in a different on a remote area than what you are actually cooling. So I hope with this you guys got a basic understanding of how refrigeration cycles, I mean how the refrigerants work and a little bit of a heat theory. So now we're gonna jump into the refrigeration cycle and Rob's gonna take over from here.
Yeah, give me 1 second, B.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta change my thingy here.
Yeah. So yeah, basically here you guys gonna see how the heat theory and the refrigeration cycle goes hand in hand. And
Yeah,
it's all
this section coming up, guys, is important because this answers the question of what state that refrigerant is in before and after each process of the refrigeration. Okay. When we think about refrigeration, air conditioning, it's the vapor compression system. Okay. So this vapor compression system has been the same for a really long time. It never changes. Okay. The four processes never change. However, advances in technology change the controls. However, that core vapor compression system has been the same for a long time. So, four processes we talk about. We got evaporation, compression, condensation, and expansion. So, you might get a question, what state is the refrigerant in after the evaporator? Okay. Well, to figure that out, we first got to draw this out. All right. So our refrigeration cycle is a never-ending cycle, right? It's just a loop. It keeps going and going and going. We're going to start at the process known as the metering device. All right. Now, the metering device could also be called the expansion valve because that's the process that it takes care of. It expands the refrigerant. So coming into the metering device, we have this high pressure, high temperature liquid refrigerant. The metering device throttles it back, okay? It forces it through a tiny orifice and it's expanded on the other side of that. When we expand things, we're dropping the pressure. We're creating more room for the particles that squeeze through. Think about a water bottle, right? That you do your plants with or that you spray the cat with when it jumps up on the counter. If you set that to mist, and you put hot water inside the bottle, if you missed some of that water on your arm, it's got a cooling effect because we're forcing it through a small hole and expanding it on the other side. So that's what we're doing with the expansion valve or the metering device. We're taking a high pressure, high temperature liquid refrigerant and we're manipulating the pressure to achieve a temperature. Okay, that's known as Boyle's law. Anytime we have a closed system, temperature and pressure are directly related. So the idea is out of this metering device, we're right at the boiling point, okay? Manipulating pressure to achieve a temperature. So if we think about atmospheric pressure, okay, a jug of 410A, if we had a jug of 410A and we release that to the atmosphere, on the other end of that, it's going to be negative 44 degrees. Now we put it in a closed system, take that pressure to 200 psi. Now our boiling point is 65 degrees, okay? We manipulate pressure to achieve temperatures. So coming out of the metering device, that refrigerant is right at its boiling point. Dropped pressure to change temperature. Low pressure, low temperature liquid. Okay, so we took a high pressure liquid, turned it into a low pressure liquid to achieve a temperature. Now that the refrigerant is right at its boiling point, what do I need to have a phase change? Well, I need BTUs. Okay, so we run that low pressure, low temperature liquid through an evaporator. What the evaporator is doing is it's passing room temperature air through it. Higher temperature, introducing BTUs to that boiling point. Now we have a phase change. As our liquid boils off to a vapor, it's absorbing BTUs. So a design temperature for 410A, if we have 70-degree air coming into the evaporator, we have 50-degree air coming out. It's a 20-degree temperature swing. All right, that's how it's absorbing. So to Brando's point, we're not creating cold air. We're removing BTUs from the existing air around us and just putting them where they don't matter. So low pressure, low temperature liquid into the evaporator, introduce BTUs, create a phase change, absorbing BTUs. Now I have a low pressure gas. Now this gas is chock full of BTUs I've collected. All right. We need to do something to that low pressure gas to be able to release those BTUs to the outside ambient. So heat absorption is that evaporative action. All right. Heat absorption. First law of thermodynamics is we can't create or destroy energy. All the energy already exists. So I can't manipulate these BTUs and destroy them. I got to put them somewhere. So our low pressure gas that's chock full of BTUs has to be sent outside. Well, what if it's 120 degrees outside? That's where our compressor comes in, okay? Our compressor, it's the heart of the system. It's pumping, it's keeping all the refrigerant going, but it's also creating a delta. It's jacking up the pressure to change the temperature once again. All right, so the compressor is squeezing and reducing the volume of space inside itself to bring those particles closer together, get them vibrating faster, right? The faster we vibrate particles, the more heat energy we have. So it's manipulating the pressure to achieve a temperature once again. Coming out of the compressor, oh, hold on a second, guys. I went the wrong way. Let me catch up. So low pressure liquid, we absorb BTUs, we phase change to a low pressure gas. Now we go into the compressor to create a delta, right? Coming out of the compressor, still a gas, but we're high pressure, high temperature gas. Now we're in a great position to run it through our condenser. We send ambient air through the condenser. Remember, hot goes to cold. If my vapor is a hotter temperature than the ambient air being forced through the coil, it naturally releases those BTUs and phase changes back. Latent heat of condensation. All right. That's where we started before, high pressure, high temperature liquid. So this is a great slide, guys, to really explain what we have coming in and coming out. If you guys got your cameras there, take a picture of it. This also lives inside your student portal. So it's a good little study guide. But I always tell people when I'm teaching, think about the process, what that process does. It's in the name. expansion. Okay, why am I expanding? I'm manipulating a pressure to achieve a temperature. Compressor, same deal, manipulating pressure to change the temperature. My other two guys, I'm absorbing BTUs or releasing BTUs. So two areas we have a phase change. The other two areas we have a pressure temperature change. Pretty simple if you kind of just think about the process. And that process, again, is evaporator, condenser, expansion, and of course, compression. So let's look at it from another angle. I draw a box and I want to remove the heat from this box. I'm going to start with a high pressure, high temperature liquid refrigerant. I'm going to bring that inside to my metering device or expansion valve, right? I'm using that expansion valve to manipulate pressure to achieve a temperature. I'm going to get that refrigerant right at its boiling point. So pressure temperature change at the expansion valve. Now I can run it through my evaporator to absorb BTUs while phase changing from a liquid to a vapor. I'm a low pressure vapor. Here's my compressor to increase the pressure, spike the temperature so I can release those BTUs to the outside ambient. Let's animate this. We can get a better look at what's actually happened. So you'll note up top as the red refrigerant up top turns blue as we drop the pressure temperature. Right now we're absorbing BTUs and it's turning translucent. Now it's a low pressure, low temperature gas. Okay. What do I need to do to that gas to be able to reject BTUs to the outside ambient? I got to spike that pressure. So we put it in the compressor and the compressor is reducing the volume of space it has. It's increasing the pressure to spike the temperature. Now we're going to take that high pressure, high temperature gas through our condenser, force ambient air through there, and we're getting another phase change. Latent heat of condensation. We're condensating from a vapor back to a liquid, and there's our cycle. Okay. So a couple other terms you could use to describe these processes. We got the expansion valve is your pressure dropper. Your evaporation is your heat absorber. Compression is your pressure increaser. And condensation is your heat rejector. So two places we manipulate pressure to achieve temperature. The other two has nothing to do with pressure, temperature. It's phase change, absorption, rejection. Okay. So let's take a closer look at these processes. When we talk about the evaporator, we have to talk about airflow. Okay. This is where we're absorbing BTUs. If we move air too fast through that evaporator, we're not getting full heat absorption. If we move it too slow through the evaporator, we're freezing. Okay. So here's your design for that. Brando mentioned earlier, 12,000 BTUs per ton of refrigeration. I'm going to throw another number at you. 400 CFM, cubic feet per minute of air per ton of air conditioning. If I have a 3-ton system, I need to move 1,200 cubic feet per minute of air for this science to work. Okay. You have to. So I used to tell my guys that it's not hard. A lot of guys go out and think this is so, intricate. Oh, it's got to be this because that's the most difficult thing. Airflow, guys, 80% of service calls are airflow. These are sealed systems. Okay, so if it's installed properly, it's been running for 3 years. What happened that 4th year, barring no refrigerant leak? Something changed in the airflow. Things get dirty. Coils get dirty. If you have a filter that looks like this in the screen, right? Our coil's freezing up. Now, the next thing that happens is that filter rips. Now, your coil itself becomes the filter. That gets like a fur coat on the inside. Got to have good airflow. Okay. So make sure we're exploring that first. When we go to a house that's got a frozen coil, you put gauges on there without the system running and it's balanced out at 200 PSI, you probably got enough refrigerant to where you're not freezing up. It's got to be airflow. So think outside the box. You got a rooftop unit. and they're doing work to the building. They got a sheet of plywood leaning against the return for the rooftop unit. You think that's going to work? Hell no. That thing's not going to work because you're restricting the airflow through there. Okay. So 400 CFM per ton, 12,000 BTUs per ton. Okay. Compressors, again, this is the heart of the system. All right. They're manipulating a pressure to achieve a temperature, many different types of compressors, but the main objective, spike that pressure so we can release the BTUs to the outside ambient. Most of us are going to be working on scroll compressors. These are pretty much throughout the industry. All right. When it tears apart, you'll see it's two matching scrolls inside, and they orbit each other. It creates these pockets. So it takes our low pressure vapor in from the outside and it reduces the space that it has towards the middle. That creates a pressure spike, which creates a temperature rise. Okay. There's your scroll compressors. Centrifugal compressors, totally different. This is more industrial, guys. Okay. There's no pistons, vanes, or meshing rotors to affect the positive displacement of the vapor. Instead, all your compression is the result of a centrifugal force. It's generated by a rotating impeller at really high speeds. If they tell you to wear ear protection around this, do it. Dan, one of the other instructors, he spent his adult life in plant operations, and he said he's been affected by centrifugal chiller noise. So heed the warnings, okay? This guy here is a dual acting compressor or just dual compressor. It gets its name. It compresses vapor on both sides of the piston. That's it. Okay. That's opposed to a single acting reciprocating compressor, one side of the piston. These are huge in the industry, probably 15 years ago. And then they came out with the scroll, and these guys kind of went bye-bye because little less efficient than the scrolls. Your condenser. I will say the same thing about this that I said inside. Where, if you think about residential systems, the system at your house, where they put the condensers, around back in a mulch bed. Landscapers come every year, they mulch the beds, and they bury this thing 5 inches all the way around it. You think that's pulling enough air through? Nope. You're going to start running a high head pressure. It's totally different. It's opposite of not moving enough air through the evaporator. You don't move enough air through the evaporator, you see the pressure drop. You don't move enough air through the condenser, you're going to see that thing spike. You're going to start running a really high head pressure, right? Really high head pressure, and then your compressor's going to knock off on thermal overload. It's got a switch inside that says, whoa, I'm too hot. Disconnect that link. Okay. So it's really, really important to make sure these guys are breathing properly. It goes same outside as it is inside. If I got to move 1200 CFM, I better move it. Okay. So keep that in mind, guys. Expansion valves, many different types. This one here is a thermal expansion valve. Okay. What this does is this bulb, which is called your control bulb, it's reading as this is running. Okay. It's self-correcting. That's why you see them all over the industry now. So this one, there's a gray area. There's some wiggle room. It modulates. A fixed orifice, like a piston, there's no wiggle room. It either works or it doesn't. If it gets partially clogged, doesn't work. That's why you see these guys in the industry so much, because of that wiggle room. You know, they're pretty much in every industry now. So we got our thermal expansion. You got piston orifice. You got capillary tubes. That's a commercial guy. You get into refrigerant rack systems, you'll see some capillary tubes. You got an automatic expansion valve, and you got EEVs, electronic expansion valves, on most of our mini splits. It's possible to have 2 expansion valves. If you're working on a heat pump, you're going to have an expansion valve at the evaporator as well as the condenser, because a heat pump switches those 2 coils. There's a series of bypasses in there. Okay. In heat pump mode, your condensing unit outside is now your evaporator, and Your evaporator inside is now your condenser. So you're absorbing BTUs outside, rejecting them inside. So we need a metering device at both coils. It's never the same metering device. Okay, you can't have two TX valves. You can have a TX valve and a capillary tube. Mini splits usually use an EEV for air conditioning and a capillary tube for heat pump for your condenser. So be aware of that. If you got a heat pump, just know you have two expansion valves on there. Okay. So as our system runs, you'll note the red box slowly turn blue as we're absorbing BTUs in that phase change and we're rejecting them outside to the ambient where it doesn't matter. Okay. Centrifugal chillers, which we talked about a little bit different. Okay. This is your centrifugal chiller. This is remote. This is indirect cooling. It's remote of the area that it's conditioning. And it does it by using a secondary refrigerant. This loop here would be a closed loop of water or glycol. It's carrying BTUs to your refrigerant system here. This loop goes out to collect more. Then your refrigerant cycle, you got your evaporator, goes to your compressor, goes over here to your condenser. Down here, you would have a metering device. Same four processes, totally different industry, different means of achieving what you're doing, same four processes. And that's what I love about this industry is if you understand the vapor compression system, you can work on anything. Okay. And a lot of your better technicians that are at the top of their game, they know the science. Okay. So, younger guys on here, if you've never studied the laws of thermodynamics, it's worth a look. Okay. You get some downtime, pull them up, understand them. And a good way to do it is just plug them into everyday things that you see, your refrigerator at home, just everyday things. It kind of forces you to think differently. Okay. The next time, you understand you go to a picnic and you're filling a cooler full of your favorite beverage, put water in there before you put the ice in there. You're looking for mass, right? You fill the whole thing with ice. You got gaps, you got voids. You're not getting mass out of that. All right. It actually gets colder as it starts turning the water because you're creating mass. So it just helps you think a little bit differently. Now, we're going to ask those 4 important questions. I want you guys to think about the process. Choose the best answer. Here we go. In what state does the refrigerant leave the condenser? Think about what we do in the condenser. All right. For the most part, we're right. Guys, we're a high pressure liquid. The condenser is where we're rejecting BTUs and phase changing back to a liquid. Okay. So we know we got high pressure vapor coming in. We reject those BTUs. We got high pressure liquid going out. We don't, if it says condenser or evaporator, we're not changing temperature. We're phase changing. Okay. So that one's going to be A. Here's another one. In the refrigeration cycle, after expansion, what state is the refrigerant in? What's our expansion valve do? Where is it? All right, another one. For the most part, majority has the right answer, right? Expansion. That means we're taking a high pressure liquid, expanding it to a low pressure liquid. We're manipulating that pressure to achieve a temperature which is right at its boiling point. Okay. So in the refrigerant cycle after compression, what state is the refrigerant in? What's our compressor do? So far, so good, guys. Perfect. Yeah. Good job, guys. That one's D, right? Think about this. The name of this system is the vapor compression system. You get any question on a compressor that says liquid, it's wrong. You cannot put liquid into a vapor compressor. You'll slug it up and ruin it. Okay. So, right from Jump Street, I get rid of two of those answers. So, keep that in the back of your heads. All right. In the refrigerant cycle, after evaporation, what state is the refrigerant in? What's the evaporator do? Where's it at in the line? It's after expansion. Excellent. Good job, everybody. Yep. We're going to be a low pressure vapor. Okay. So, if you're testing today, great. If you're not testing today, study that. The refrigerant cycle is so important. There's a science to this industry, guys. And the more you know the science, the more you know what's supposed to happen in there, right? What's happening? Why is it freezing up? Well, are we not absorbing BTUs? It's really important to understand that. And I reiterate, like here at the training center, when we get our HVAC students coming in for a career program, first thing we do is teach theory and science because it's very important. Okay. So now we're going to shift gears. We're going to get back to focus of refrigerants. All right. We're going to go through the classifications. I'm going to give you a couple key refrigerants from each grouping. The popular refrigerant, they're not going to ask you to name refrigerants, but you do need to know certain ones. And I'm going to tell you those ones. Okay. So when we talk about refrigerants, each one, they're different. So we got to know the differences. We got to know the popular guys, and we got to talk about blends. All right. So common abbreviations, you got your CFCs. These were the first refrigerants. HCFC, second round of refrigerants. HFC, third round. And of course, now we're on our fourth round of refrigerants, HFOs. So we got to break these guys down and understand what they are. CFCs, chlorofluorocarbon. Chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. This is the one that did the most damage to the ozone layer because of the chlorine. At this point, these guys are class 1 and they're phased out. Now, what's a phase out mean? It means you can't buy them anymore. They stopped making them. Does it make them illegal? No. You can own an antique car that has R12 in it, and that's fine. What is illegal is venting them to the atmosphere. That's what's illegal about them. All right. So when we think about CFCs, when a molecule is released, it goes up into the stratosphere, gets broken up by the UV rays, and it punches a hole. Okay. What's illegal is doing that. If you knowingly release a CFC to the atmosphere and you get caught, it's over $44,000 fine. You're not allowed to do it. And that's why they're phased out. Popular brands, R11, R12. R11, R12. These were actually Freon. So when you hear people say the modern day refrigerants are not Freon, it's just a nickname that stuck. These were Freon. Okay. R11, R12 did the most damage to the ozone layer. They are phased out. Okay. Class 1 phased out. Now Once that shift happened in the 70s, engineers got to work. What are we going to do? Here's what we got. HCFC, hydrochlorofluorocarbon, hydrogen, chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. The hydrogen was meant to break up the molecule, which it did. It did its job, just didn't do it well enough. Okay, so right now we are at the tail end of this phase out. All right. Popular ones, R22, R123. 22 is probably most popular refrigerant ever. Very easy to work with, super efficient, high ODP. So as of 2020, this phase out started. They limited production of it, and as of 2030, you're not going to be able to purchase it anymore. Now, same as the CFCs, you can use it, you can own it, you can charge somebody's system that has R22, can't release it. You get caught releasing it, over $44,000 fine. All right, what that looked like when it was released to the atmosphere, your molecule goes up, gets hit by the UV rays, it breaks apart, punches a bunch of little holes. So, the hydrogen worked, but not enough. Not enough to say, okay, we're good to go. This phase out happens 2030. Then we saw the birth of HFCs. This is what we're dealing with now, okay? R410A, pretty much every residential system. Up to about 5 years ago, R134A was in all our automobiles, all right? Recently, it's an HFO, but before, any automobile you went to was 134A, okay? HFC, hydrofluorocarbon, hydrogen, fluorine, carbon. Chlorine is gone. These have a 0 ODP. They do not affect the stratosphere. They have a high GWP. Okay. So right now, what the government is doing is they're asking you if you have systems that run off of an
Rob, you lost the connection. Nobody can hear you.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys still with me? Apologize about that. I got booted off my Zoom here, so give me a second. Guys, just let me know in the chat if you can hear me. Awesome, man. Yeah, sometimes those freak things happen, you just get kicked off for a second. Luckily, it saved everything for us here. Let me just get myself situated, guys, and I'll pick up right where I left off. Again, apologize for that. All right, guys. So I believe we were on HFCs. So again, the government with HFCs, there's nothing in place right now where they're saying you can't do this, you can't do that. What they're doing is saying, hey guys, can you find an alternative substance? So that's where we're at. Is a phase out for this coming? Yeah, probably. All right. So what they'll do is they'll limit the industry, hence telling manufacturers you got to use a refrigerant that has a lower GWP. So what'll happen is the manufacturers of 410A will scale down manufacturing because they're not selling it to manufacturers of systems. They're still selling it to supply houses and things of that nature, but that'll slow down. It'll drive the price up and you'll be forced to go in a different direction. All right. So that's how HCFC started, that they handcuffed manufacturing and, now R22 is a premium. It's very expensive. The last 33-gallon jug I bought I think it was close to $1,600. So 410A is going to do the same exact thing. Now, why has it all happened? It all started with the Montreal Protocol. Okay. This is back in 1987. This was a global problem. It's a global problem. So over 30 nations signed this treaty that they were going to try and focus on the ozone issue. Okay. So global problem, over 30 nations. The date doesn't matter. They're not going to ask you about the date. Okay. But this was to set the phase out for CFCs. Setting the phase out for CFCs. Okay. When you think about the United States, we were a part of the Montreal Protocol, but we also came up with the Clean Air Act. All right. Now, the Clean Air Act is what set the schedule for HCFCs. So CFC's Montreal Protocol, HCFC's Clean Air Act. All right. This is what outlined, we want everything done by 2030. Now, when they phase out these refrigerants, man, it takes 20, 30 years. Right? If they did it instant, it would cripple the industry. We'd never be able to recover. So when they phase out a refrigerant, it's over a span of time. Now, when we think about HFCs, bad for global warming, right? Climate endangerment. The Clean Air Act has something known as the SNAP program. So whereas they're not saying they're phasing down, this is what's asking people. For example, we have a company that does training with us, Hojizaki. They make ice machines. Okay. They read the SNAP program and they said, okay, we want to take all our high GWP systems to a very low GWP refrigerant. They chose propane, which is a hydrocarbon. It's an HC refrigerant, very flammable. So they had parameters that they had to follow, use conditions. So they're assuming that cost of that so they can remain compliant. Okay. So when we think about the SNAP program, here's propane as a refrigerant right here. Oh, let me get my pen back. Right here. Okay. Here's its acceptable use conditions. So when you go into that, it's going to say, well, your lighting has to be intrinsically safe. You have to have anti-static dissipative mats going in and out of the area. So it really is an overhaul to go from a non-flammable refrigerant to a highly flammable refrigerant. But they're making that investment now to, make it easier for themselves in the long run. So when we talk about the regulations, the Clean Air Act, the SNAP program, the Montreal Protocol, I always tell people this. Your local state can have more stringent rules and regs than the government itself. States like California, Rhode Island, Hawaii, they have very strict conservation laws. So always look at your local laws before you decide to do what you do. Okay. It may have a more stringent law than the EPA. So this is about knowing the proper way to handle stuff, and the regulations that are set forth right now. Their regulations do change. They change every 3 years. So what I like to do is Google like in August of the year that they change and just say new regulations for the EPA, understand them and move on. I can put it to bed for a couple of years. Because remember, once you're licensed, it's your responsibility to follow up with any regulation changes. Okay. So another refrigerant we're going to have to deal with, HFOs. These are the new guys. They're hydrofluoroolefins. They are hydrogen, fluorine, and carbon. That's an HFC, right? What makes them different? Here's what we're told. Okay. It's the molecular level. Inside our systems, we have system component oil. More times than not, nowadays, we're using synthetic oils. The new HFO refrigerants have the same molecular structure as system component oils. So anytime you have one or more fluorine and a double carbon bond, that matches synthetic oil. Inside the system, you're going to get better miscibility. which is mixability. Okay. You'll get better miscibility, better thermodynamic properties, more efficient refrigerant. That's what science tells us. That's what the engineers tell us. So when we think about GWP, it's greenhouse gases, it's wasted energy. We're too much energy to power our systems, too many systems, right? So the idea is, how can we make them more energy efficient? And this is what they came up with. Now, the problem with this is, when we think about the history of refrigerants, they've been pretty safe to work with. Pretty safe to work with. No, flammability, low toxicity. Now that changes. Okay. Matter of fact, the new HFOs are an A2L. That category did not exist 10 years ago. It went A1, A2, A3. B1, B2, B3. B deals with toxicity. A deals with flammability. All right. A2L means that there's a chance that they're flammable, but it's small. But you still have to work with them safely. Okay. So you still have to use intrinsically safe equipment. Intrinsic just means spark-free. Any vacuum pumps or recovery machines we use, they have to be spark-free. Controls need to be encapsulated so there's no arcing. That's what they're talking about with that. Okay, but it changes the game, because once ignited, an HFO releases a deadly toxin. Now, they figured this out when they were testing for automotive systems. Used to be 134A and HFC and all automotive. Now it's 1234YF, which is an HFO. When they were testing for these, it ignited. It releases hydrogen fluoride. A couple workers died. This is a very deadly toxin. So, not trying to scare anybody, but when this stuff ignites, so we got to do things the right way. If you haven't had a flammable refrigerant course, take one. They're not expensive. I think we do one for $45. Like, they're not expensive. Do it, because it just gives you that confidence, and you certainly don't want to get yourself in a position with, deadly toxins. So please do things the right way. Another category of refrigerants we're seeing making a comeback are your natural refrigerants. Okay. They did use these years ago. It's your hydrocarbons, natural refrigerants. What we're seeing, hydrogen and carbon, we're seeing propane, isobutane. Okay. Propane is known as R290. Isobutane is known as R600. R600, if you've bought a refrigerator in the last 5 years, that's what's in it. It's isobutane. All right. R290, propane, both these guys, if you get a jug of propane for your propane grill at the house and you crack that valve, you can smell it. As a refrigerant, odorless. They do not add odorants in refrigerants because they want them to be 99.5% pure. So you'll never smell it. So now you got to know the regulations and rules for sensors. Every unit that has propane in it has to have a sensor. So at the very least, if it leaks, it turns on the fan to dissipate the propane. All right. So I'm not going to kill you guys with that. That's a safety certification where you go into detail, with these different naturals. Okay. But just note, they're an A3, high flammability. Okay. That's why we can't sleep on warning labels, right? This is R454B. This is an HFO. This is said to replace 410A in many manufacturers. So if we look at this, it's flammable. It's an asphyxiant in high concentrations. That means it displaces oxygen. You can suffocate. All right. We got to store it in a well-ventilated area. Another thing I see, it's a blend. It has R32 as well as R1234YF. So it's two different refrigerants in there. So when we talk about blends, a single component refrigerant is just that. It's one thing. It was engineered to be R22. All right. This is what we're using as an example. R22 right here. Great refrigerant because it had one boiling point. So the latent heat of vaporization and the latent heat of condensation, same boiling point. Different temperatures due to the pressures, but same point at which it phase changes. Okay. Also, one column in the pressure temperature chart because we have one boiling point. Now, once we get into blends, there was a refrigerant out a while ago. It was R407C, and this stuff was god awful. It was terrible. Okay. That's because it had a mix of refrigerants that didn't get along. All right. Now I got two boiling points, two separate boiling points at, a constant pressure. Okay. So that's known as the temperature glide. That's term specific. You get on the test and you choose a temperature difference, it's going to be wrong. It's a temperature glide. Okay. This temperature glide can be anywhere from 0.2 degrees all the way up to 16 degrees. That's a big gap. Okay. So the temperature we're using for the latent heat of vaporization or superheat is known as the dew point. So the temperature or point of boiling for absorbing BTUs is known as the dew point. Rejecting BTUs, bubble point. Okay. The question's going to be worded, what boiling point are we referencing for superheat? Dew point. Subcooling, bubble point. Okay. Dew point is just absorption. Bubble point is rejection. All right. You note the 407C pressure temperature chart, two columns, one for each boiling point. So it gets a little tricky. And that's probably why it was a terrible refrigerant, because it's hard to dial in. So takeaways: temperature glide is the difference at a constant pressure. Bubble point is subcooling. Dew point is superheat. Single component refrigerant is just that, single component. Another term we have to talk about is when we have this mix of refrigerant in our system, when we get a leak, it'll leak at different rates. Okay. So you got two refrigerants that are dueling inside. You got dueling vapor pressures. All right. Here's an animation of what fractionation looks like. That action is fractionation. Here's what it looks like. Okay. We got our system running. We got a mix of refrigerants. We got two dueling vapor pressures, right? When I get a leak in that, you're going to see the red leak out much quicker than the blue. That action is known as fractionation. Okay. Pretty simple. Some of the terms we use: single component is just that. R22 was a single component refrigerant. It was engineered to be that. Azeotropic mix of two refrigerants that act as a single component. They can't fractionate. They don't separate. Okay. That's where you're reading all the answers, because azeotropic mixture, they're looking for mix of two that operate as a single component. Near azeotropic, mix of two that fractionate. Okay, so it's close to an azeotropic. It's near, but that's why they call it that. Near azeotropic, mix of two refrigerants that can separate. And of course, ternary blend is the easiest one. Ternary just means 3-part mix. It's ternary blend. It's got 3 refrigerants in there. All this information can be found here in the SDS sheets. All right. Age of technology. I can Google any SDS sheet I want. No reason not to look at these guys. Okay. They got a lot of safety stuff, first aid stuff, what that mix is made of. All right. So don't sleep on SDS sheets. Utilize them. Here's some of the questions you might see. What is a ternary blend refrigerant? Yeah, guys, that one's an alley-oop. A lot of questions on the test are kind of like that. 3-part mixture. What is an azeotropic refrigerant? Guys, this is one of the questions where I say we got a couple C's in the mix here. Got to read all the answers, right? C's not wrong. It is a two-part mix, but it's a two-part mix that operates as a single component. All right. D is your answer. Slow yourselves down, especially on a test. Like I said, you have 2 hours to take it. Read all the answers, understand all the answers. Okay. We got to mention refrigerant oils, especially with our blends. Okay. What we're looking for is we're using oils that are less hygroscopic. Okay. Hygroscopic means attracted to moisture. We don't want moisture in our systems, right? So we're looking for less hygroscopic, which is why the industry shifted to synthetic oils. What happens when we get moisture in our systems? Turns to acid. Something that happens in the industry, once you get acid, you can have what is known as a burnout. This is inside our system. Everything turns to acid. It starts eating away at internal components and it stinks. Like literally, it has an odor to it. Anytime you walk up to a system and you can smell it, it's got a burnout. You got to replace everything in there. So we're really careful we don't get any type of moisture in our systems, right? We're using synthetic oils, polyester, polyalkyl glycol, alkyl benzenes. All right. What they do is they enhance system performance. They add stability advantages, better system operation. All right. POEs you're going to see in most equipment. You'll see it residential, commercial. PAGs, your polyalkyl glycol, that's automotive. So you get a car, you got 1234YF as your refrigerant. You got polyalkyl glycol as your system component oil. Alkyl benzenes, they're for rare systems, real high pressure systems. They're for CO2 systems. Okay. There's I think it's R722, uses carbon dioxide as a refrigerant, but they operate at pressures 10 times higher than normal pressures. All right. So most of us won't run into that. A big part of the EPA is talking about conservation. This is ensuring proper recovery and recycling, detecting and repairing leaks, properly disposing of refrigerants. Remember, it's your responsibility as a licensed EPA tech. You want to ensure compliance. You definitely want to avoid fines or penalties. Okay. So this is about minimal loss. Okay. We're using self-sealing connectors when we close systems out, electronic sniffers to find a leak quick. Got to make sure those sniffers, like the one in the picture here, that's got to be intrinsically safe if he's working on an HFO or an A3 type refrigerant. It should be stamped good for flammable refrigerants. Vacuum pump, same deal. Recovery equipment, same deal. Okay. Got to use the equipment that is for that refrigerant. Preserving refrigerant, minimal loss. All our manifold gauge sets should have low loss fittings on them at this point. If you don't have them, get them. Most manifold gauge sets come with them. The difference between hooking into a service valve with and without them, it's night and day, right? There's always some loss if you don't have low loss fittings. So please, use the tools that are at our disposal to stay compliant. Okay. It's also about general awareness, safe handling. Okay. Be aware of your environment. All right. If you're working on an A3 refrigerant, you better do a sweep of the area and look for sources of ignition. You want to keep your area trip free, right? Have a fire extinguisher at the ready, Class B fire extinguisher at the ready. Something pops off, you're ready for it. Okay. Know where these guys are. Self-contained breathing apparatuses. If you work at a facility that houses a large amount of refrigerant, you better know where these guys are. You get a large leak, they tell you vacate, ventilate. You're across the other side. You got to have a self-contained breather or you'll pass out. So working in a facility that houses a large amount, know where self-contained breathing apparatuses are. Be familiar with all refrigerant cylinders and your equipment that you work in. Follow recommended procedures from the manufacturer. You never, ever refill a disposable cylinder. We'll go over that in detail. And of course, in the event of a large release, don't be a hero. You're not going to stop it. If you get a large release at the pressures that refrigerant comes out, as cold as it is, I mean, we're talking about negative 44 degrees coming out of a tank. You're not going to stop that. Don't be a hero. Get out. Okay. Understand the ASHRAE charts, those A2, A2L. Understand those charts. Wear your PPE, personal protective equipment. That is your last line of defense. All right. Generally, with safety, we want to engineer it out as much as we can. But working with refrigerants, we got to put those gauges often on the service valve. So gloves, nitrile gloves, no smoking within 50 feet, never siphon refrigerant by mouth. All right, that sounds stupid to say, but the EPA has us say it because I guess people have done it and it doesn't work out too good. So guys, don't put your mouth on refrigerant. A little bit about cylinders. There's a couple we got to cover. All right. We got disposables, dot 39s, stationary, refillable, non-refillable, and of course, recovery. All right. So your dot 39s, these are super popular. Built to Department of Transportation specification 39. These are ones you are not allowed to refill. When you're done with them, zero out the pressure. You puncture the burst disc up top and they're allowed to go to the scrap yard. You get caught trying to refill a disposable cylinder, guess what? Fine's going to be over $44,000. All right, so please zero them out like this company here. All these 410A tanks, I can see the big recovery jugs in the back. They're going to zero these out, puncture the burst disc, and they're going to be off to the scrap yard. Recovery cylinders, these are a big deal, okay? They have a yellow top and a gray body. That is a test question. They may not be filled beyond 80% capacity. That is a test question. How do we keep track of that? There's so many different sizes. There's pumpkins, there's tiny ones. There's these big boys in the back of the truck. How do we keep track of the 80% rule? The big ones in the back of this truck will have a float in them. Okay, they got a gauge right on them. You hit 80%, stop adding refrigerant, they go to the reclamation facility. You get guys like this, they don't have any type of gauge, any type of float. We got to weigh them. And there is a formula you use to weigh these. So I always tell people when you pick them up, do not get rid of that tag because we're going to use the back of that tag to monitor the weight of these guys. And we're going to get into that formula once we go through a couple more things. Okay, so yellow top, gray body may not be filled beyond 80% capacity. So more times than not, we're using recovery tanks when we're fixing a leak, but let's switch gears real quick. Leak detection. Okay, remember, type 1 appliances, nothing to do with leaks. They don't care, right? They don't care. However, your bigger systems, your type 2, type 3, they care. There's regulations to that, okay? So the EPA knows leak detection as a pinpoint method. That tells you the specific leak point. This is a sniffer, old trusty soap bubbles, right? A lot of times, though, as a technician, you got a small pinhole leak in one of the coils. You can't find it. Now we got to go stationary. That's when we're pulling the charge out. We're pressurizing our system. We can isolate different parts, different processes, and we can see which one doesn't hold pressure. That one's the problem. Swap it out, and we're good to go. Okay. In low pressure, type 3, remember, it's not going to leak out. We're going to pull impurities in. Okay, so that one's a whole nother ballgame. We can't use some of this stuff on those. We can't use a sniffer because we're not going to lose refrigerant. We can't use fluorescent dye because it's not pushing out. Even soap bubbles. Going to be hard to use on that. All right, so what do we do with low pressure stuff? Well, we use our eyes, and there's a couple of test questions involved in it. This is a couple type 3 questions. They're going to say, What is the best method for leak detection, or where do we start on a low pressure appliance to find a leak? You always start at the gaskets and fittings. Okay? Always start at the gaskets and fittings. If it has an open shaft compressor, start at the shaft seal. These are all common places where a low pressure system is going to develop a leak. All right. Another thing I'll tell you, low pressure systems have what is known as a rupture disc. Remember, they operate at low pressure. So if for any reason they start to build pressure, that pressure has got to be ejected. All right. So a rupture disc is a sacrificial disc that if you build up internal pressure, it's going to rupture that disc. That needs to be piped to the outside. Anything that relieves pressure, pressure relief, rupture disc, you can't vent them inside. They got to be vented outside. Okay. And you will more than likely see questions on that. So when we talk about leaks, leak inspections, okay, there's going to be 3 slides coming up that, you know, it's just, they're easy to remember. Okay. This particular one is about inspections. How many times do I have to look at that piece of equipment and check for a leak? Anything over 500 pounds, once every 90 days. Every 3 months, I got to walk around that thing and inspect it for leaks. Anything 50 to 500 pounds, once a year. Pretty simple, right? Super large systems over 500, every 90 days. 50 to 500, once per year. Don't worry about the comfort cooling versus commercial. It's poundage, right? Even comfort cooling, 50 or more pounds once per year. So just remember, anything over 500, 90 days, 50 to 500, once a year. That one's put to bed, okay? Leak rates. It is possible for a large system to have a leak that falls within parameters that is okay with the EPA. If you have an arena or an ice skating rink, very large systems in there, if they have a very tiny 10% leak rate over the course of a year, they don't have to fix them. Okay. But look at this. Commercial industrial leaks with a 30% rate need to be fixed within 30 days. Comfort cooling, 50 or more pounds, talking about big rooftop systems on apartment complexes. Okay. 10% rate within 30 days, right? Because now we're around people. Okay. So leak rates, anything commercial industrial that's over 30% throughout the year, every 30 days. Comfort cooling, 10%. A little more stringent on comfort cooling because we're dealing with people. Okay. The last slide I got to show you guys, this is the easiest one. This is leak repair requirements. Comfort cooling, 10%. Leak must not exceed 10%. Commercial use, 20%. Industrial, 30%. As you go up in industry, you go up in percentage. So the smaller industry, comfort cooling, 10. Commercial supermarkets, 20. Industrial, pharmaceutical plants, right? 30%. And of course, once you get into these types of ventures, record keeping is very important. All right. All I'm going to say about record keeping is it's for the span of 3 years. So the only test question you may get is how long do you keep leak rates or leak inspection records? 3 years. Any question you get about records in the EPA, 3 years. Okay. And what we're doing is we're logging everything properly. The weight of the refrigerant removed, the weight of the charge. We're even writing down the diagnostics that we had. What remedies did we have? Now, the EPA doesn't have spies out on the street looking for people doing stuff wrong, but I will tell you this. If you get turned into the EPA, you better have records to show them. All right? So, you know, I went through my entire career, 25 plus years, never dealt with the EPA once. But that's from following the regulations. Okay, so all you got to do is follow regulations. You got 0 issues. And remember, if regulations change, they do it every 3 years. It follows the International Mechanical Code Book. So you can Google it. Hey, what regulations are changing as of 2026? And it'll pop it up for you. EPA.gov is another great way. They have a phenomenal government website, probably the best one I've seen. You go up into the search box, it's EPA.gov, search for regulation changes. It gives them to you in PDF form. Really, really easy to use and understand. But remember, it is your responsibility to do that. Couple of definitions I'm throwing at you guys. All right. We call them the 3 R's. Recycle, recover, reclaim. Okay. You will have questions on these. So recover, the EPA defines as removing in any condition. That's removing refrigerant in any condition. Could be good, could be bad, could be a burnout. It's the act of recovering refrigerant. Recycle is a tricky one. Cleaning it for immediate reuse. That means we're sending it through a series of filtration before we put it back into the system. Now, can we pull out a charge from a house on Elm Street, set up like a filtration system and put it into a house on Church Street? No, that's illegal. We can't make money off the refrigerant twice. All right. Pull out a charge, make a repair and put that charge right back in. Yeah, we can do that as long as it goes into a system owned by the same person. So recycle is cleaning it for immediate reuse. And of course, reclaim, sending it out for processing. At that point, it goes out to a reclamation facility. They clean it back to its virgin properties. All right. Any jug of R22 you buy today, it's reclaimed. They stopped manufacturing it back in 2020. Okay. So definitions. Now, when you recover, it means removing from the system in any condition. It all starts with a recovery tank. All right. Same type refrigerants, only you are not allowed to ever mix refrigerants. If you get that tank and it's not under a vacuum, you need to put it under a vacuum. We have to check the integrity of the tank. Now, the EPA recognizes the measure of vacuum as microns. Okay. We want to take this to a 1,000 micron vacuum. If you're working in an industry that uses millimeters of mercury, super simple. Do a Google search of the conversion from microns to millimeters of mercury. It pops right up. Okay. If you're doing a recovery to make a repair and you're going to put the refrigerant back in, always purge your air lines. You don't want to get moisture in there. Here is the recovery tank formula I told you guys about. All right. This is in your student portals. This is important. When you get a recovery tank, there's 2 stamps on the top. That's your tare weight and water capacity. What we're going to do is we know we can only fill it to 80%. So we're going to take 0.8 and we're going to multiply it by the water capacity. That's going to give us 38.08. Now, we have to find the specific gravity of the refrigerant recovered at 77 degrees. How the hell do I find that? You Google it. I did it for R22. So 38.08, multiply that by 1.16, which is for R22, and you get 44.17. Now we're just going to add the tare weight. That gives us 60.77. I always round down. So this tank, if I pick it up or it gets dropped off to me from a supply house, I'm going to take that tag that it has, flip it over. I'm going to put R22 only, 60-pound max. Now we can all weigh it as we're using it. We get to 55 pounds and somebody says, hey, you know, I got a 5-pound chart. Let me try it. Don't do it. It's going to be overweight and the reclamation facility is going to turn it away. They have that ability. All right. So make sure you're following regulations. And here we go. No mixing refrigerants under any circumstance. You might get a trick question. You know, what 2 refrigerants can I mix together? And it'll have a bunch of different answers. And then it'll say none. It's none. You're not allowed to do it at all. A couple different methods for recovery. All right. We got liquid, vapor. That's the most common. When you recover in liquid, it's the fastest way to do it. However, you can lose some system component oil. So if you're pulling out to make a repair, do it in vapor. Take the time. It's the only way to assure minimal oil loss. Now, if you're scrapping the system for a swap out, yeah, do it in liquid, be done with it. But think about what you're doing. If you do it in vapor, you're not going to disturb the system component oil. Always use a recovery scale. You got to know how much you're pulling out. Plus, you got to track how much you're putting in. So a good recovery scale is very important in the industry. All right. Couple types of recovery. You can use system dependent. When the compressor is working, you could take an empty bottle under a vacuum and use the compressor to pump it right into the bottle. Most people do an active recovery. That's when you're using a recovery machine. You can hook it up, you turn it on, you go do some other things while it's pulling the charge out. That's the difference, active, system dependent. Evacuating systems. This is a big one. Okay. This is about doing it right the first time and, not having issues down the line. Anytime we're degassing and dehydrating, we're evacuating. Now, this is not a timed event, people. Okay. You can't just be like, I had the vacuum pump on for 40 minutes. It's good. We're measuring this. We're using microns again. The EPA wants to see a 500 micron vacuum. That's a pretty deep vacuum. And what that does is it assures that you have no leaks. You can't pull 500 microns if you have a leak. It also ensures you have no impurities in there. Right? This could take a half hour. It could take an hour. But you got to be patient. If you're stuck on 1,000 microns for more than 15 minutes, you got a leak. Okay? So please take the time, do things the right way. If you got digital gauges right here, bang, you don't need an external micron gauge. Shows you right on the face of your digital gauges. I also like to tell people anytime we got our system open to the environment, change that filter dryer. Yeah, we took it to a 500 micron, but what happens 3 years down the road when an inexperienced guy hooks onto the service valves in the rain? We could introduce moisture. That's your last line of defense. Okay. So the 3 things I like to do anytime I open my system up to the environment, I'm doing a full pressure test. I'm making sure I replace that filter dryer, and I'm doing a full 500 micron vacuum. Okay. Very important things. I want to walk you guys through some practice questions before I give you the Brando, and he's going to talk about the proctoring and how we get there. Okay. So look at these commonsensical questions. Which of the following is true if a system will not hold a vacuum? And take your time with the answers. And I say these are commonsensical questions because if you stop and think about it, there's only one there's only one answer that really makes sense. And there's a lot of questions like this. Yeah, guys, it's got to leak. If you can't pull a vacuum, it's got to leak. Same deal, this one. Common sense. Listen, what should you do after reaching the required recovery vacuum on a low pressure appliance? Even if we don't work on low pressure, this makes sense. Good job, guys. So far, so good. Love to see it. Yeah, it's the only one that makes sense, right? You got to wait a few minutes to see if the system rises before charging. How about this one? According to the EPA Section 608, what is the maximum allowed capacity a recovery tank can be filled to? Here's your alley-oop. %, man. This next one's tricky. What is the term used to describe the fact that a refrigerant has The refrigerant blend has a range of bubble or dew points at a constant pressure. What did we say that was? That's it, guys. B all day. Temperature glide. Here's the last one before I pass you to Brando. Recovery cylinders have what? Yeah, yellow tops and gray bodies. That one is A. Guys, this is like if you take your time and you think commonsensical type stuff, going to do fine. All right. You guys were a great group. Um, I love the interaction in the chat. You guys were on top of the questions. So what Brando's going to do now is he's going to walk you guys through your questions about proctoring. How do we get to proctoring again? We do have a session today at 2:00. All right. That's it for me though. I wish you guys all the luck on the exam. Just take your time, guys, and you should do fine. Okay. Go ahead, B, take it.
All right, guys. So you should already be familiar with this, the trainingcenter.com. But if you guys haven't done, you guys want to visit this website, uh, for the you already have an account. So if you guys haven't created a username, you're gonna use the same email you used to sign up for this, and then you're gonna hit create password, or it should say forget password. If you guys already have an account with us, so all you're gonna want to do is when it prompts you to this screen, like I said, if you guys haven't created them, you here's create password and your username. Then after that, you're gonna get prompted to your student portal. It's gonna look something like this. The first thing you guys want to make sure is that the address provided there is correct. So this right here, if you guys do need to make any edits, you can always hit the edit icon right here, or you can go to profile and edit it there as well. So to find your exam, you're gonna want to hit launch course. So it should, when you get to your student portal, all your courses that you sign up for are gonna be right below. So you should see the 608, uh, the 608, the EPA 608 course. So you should be able to click on that. It's gonna see this green circle, and it's gonna prompt you to this screen. Well, actually, no. When you hit my courses at the top, that's when it's gonna prompt you to this screen. Here, this is all your courses you sign up for. Obviously, you're gonna look for the one that says EPA 608, and once you click that, it's gonna prompt you to this screen right here. This is where gonna be all your curriculums. So the recording that we have that we just did right now, you're gonna be able to access it here as well. So yeah, right here, this is where our recording. So after 30 minutes after the Zoom is over, you're gonna be able to access this same recording. And so if you guys don't feel comfortable and want to watch the video again, you can always do that here where it says 608 live webinar. Also here, this is where you're gonna be able to do your practice test and your final test. So your practice test is gonna be right here where it says practice. They're gonna ask you similar questions that are gonna be on the final exam, and they're gonna give you the answer right away. So even if you were to fail on the practice test, you can use the wrong answers to help you prepare yourself for the final exam. So the final exam, you can only open with a live proctor. So what that basically means is you need to be in a proctoring session. So right now I'm gonna provide the links for you guys real quick. Just give me 1 second. So yeah, so the link in the top, this is to access your student portal. So like I said, that's where you're gonna be able to watch the recording, do some practice tests, and you should also see your final test at the end. But remember, guys, you need to be in a proctoring session to be able to take the test, because if not, it's not gonna count. So if you do feel not comfortable today to take your test, you can always schedule yourself another proctoring session whenever we have it ready. And you can always check once you click on that link where it says proctoring, it's gonna take you to our schedule. So it'll let you know what we have available. I believe we have one available at 2:00, 2:00, 2 p.m. Eastern time. So if you guys do feel comfortable, you guys can join one today. So when you join the EPA 608 proctoring session, it's gonna look similar like this. If you guys haven't done so already, you guys want to make sure that you have a working webcam. You need to make sure your audio is good and then that you have a strong Wi-Fi. Uh, for the video, you just make sure you want to capture your face and your workspace for the duration of the exam. You're not gonna talk for the most part, but if you do need help finding your exam, you do want to have a working mic so you can let us know, and then we can help you find your exam. For the internet, if you do lose connection, we cannot get that back for you, so it will result in a retest. So there's no fee or how many limit of how many attempts you can take your test. So even if you were to fail, you can just join another proctoring or just schedule yourself another proctoring when you're ready to retest. When you're finding your exam, here I'll walk you through real quick. So yeah, you're gonna once you if you're off your student portal, you want to hit launch course, which is right here. Once you hit launch course, it should prompt you to a screen similar like this one. Pretty much from here on, you're just gonna want to hit the left arrow key. It's gonna open this scroll down bar. You're gonna all the way down where it says final exam only open with a live proctor, and then you should see the take test option. Pretty simple. Uh, so yeah, guys, if you guys don't got any questions, that's pretty much how they. Oh, and then of course, after you finish taking your exam, you guys want to let the proctoring guy know that or gal to that you finished, so you can so we can confirm we have your score, and then we could begin doing your credentials. So yeah, guys, like Rob said, you guys did great today on the chat. You guys were very active, which is we love. And yeah, if you guys don't got any questions, you guys are free to go and do a do some practice tests. So Michaela, you don't have to. You can just write it in the chat. So you don't have to raise your hand. If you have any questions, you can just ask away. Is the final exam rated immediately? Yes. So you will get the results right away. So as soon as you review and submit, you will get your results right away. Like Rob said earlier, if you get anything under a 72, we won't get any messages. So you will have to let us know, or you will just have to reattempt to take the test again. But yeah, you will get your results right away. And yeah, no problem, guys. Good luck on the test. Yep, no problem.